One of the goals of Farmers Union talks about enhancing, protecting the well-being, the quality of life for farming and ranching communities now and for generations to come. Well, you are confronted with so many attacks right now from all sides that your way of life, the likelihood of that being passed down to your grandkids is pretty unlikely. And this TransCanada is another attack on that way of life by dictating how you can and can't ranch, how you can and can't farm, and kind of telling Nebraskans how we should do things in our state. Nebraska Easement Action Team, it's a non-profit organization with the acronym NEAT. This group is all about landowners' rights and empowerment. It's pretty simple, as we've seen today. Standing alone, we really can't do that much. We all have one voice, and that's where it starts. But if we don't organize, we can't even come close to dealing with multi-billion-dollar multinational corporations. So NEAT is all about education and empowerment, empowering landowners, empowering Nebraskans about eminent domain abuse, what's going on, what you can and can't do, what avenues are available for you, and getting you to all come together in a union of sorts of landowners so that we can be united, one strong voice, one negotiation against TransCanada for fair easement terms. Because the easement terms, that document you sign, whoever in here has ever signed an easement before, that dictates what happens on that piece of ground. And if you're not negotiating against them, you better believe they're going to get everything in their favor and put as many terms against you and your family and future generations as possible. So we don't want to build the Army after we've been attacked, as an analogy. We need to get going now. We can't sit and wait and see, well, maybe what'll happen, and at the 11th hour, let's get organized. It's time to get organized now because this fight's on your doorstep and it's coming. So this is the big question I get asked everywhere we go, and had the pleasure to testify at the legislature, be all around this great state and take calls from all over the country, myself and Mr. Domina, Dave Domina, who I work for. And how does this happen? How does a foreign company, let alone just a private company with a for-profit motive, the almighty dollar, not our interests in heart, your interest, how does a foreign company come into our country, into your backyard, your neighbor's backyards, and take your land? That is a question that people just can't wrap their heads around. And we can vilify TransCanada, and I don't mind doing that from time to time because if the shoe fits, you have to wear it. And I have experience and firsthand knowledge. But in this state, this all starts with where? The legislature. The people we all elect, with the governor, a person we elect. You do have a voice, and all the people that you've apparently voiced and your neighbors have voiced are in Lincoln, and they're talking for you. And that's why this happens, because there weren't stronger eminent domain laws. There wasn't enough focus on preparing for this next generation of pipelines, this next generation of energy demand. And the framework of eminent domain in Nebraska is completely, it's a mess, just quite frankly. It's an absolute mess. So just briefly, I want to set up the framework of how this happened so you understand it. And I have this as the beginning of the end. And that's maybe the beginning of the end of the beginning, because there is some hope here. But without you, as has been the tone and the theme throughout today, without you rising up, this will be the beginning of the end for property rights for all of you and your neighbors. Fifth Amendment in the Constitution, private property can't be taken for public use without just compensation. There it's anticipated that it would be the government. The government can't take your land for public use without compensating you justly. What might be an example of that? Well, the interstate system would be the best, the biggest eminent domain condemnation project in the country. Public use, pretty hard to argue that that's not public use. If you don't have a car, it doesn't matter. You probably wear clothes, you probably have things in your house, and that's transportation, and you benefit from that. Over the years, and actually the centuries since the Constitution, Supreme Court cases have morphed this idea of public use, so we're the public, we use it, to public purpose, a little more amorphous, what's a purpose, to now public benefit. So if we can somehow, or the companies that want to take your land can somehow justify, well, this will have some tangential benefit to you and your public or to someone else, then we should be able to take it because we know how to use your land better than you do, and we've got a project, and we've got shareholders, and we need to make money. And it's been this slow erosion. Within Nebraska, our Constitution, like many states, mirrors that of the federal Constitution. Pretty much the same thing. We've got this idea of public use. But here in Nebraska and nationally, it's been the same erosion. And how you define things is very dangerous because you can define things in a way to suit you. And when you have the lobbyists and the money and the power, then you define terms in the way that fits you. In Nebraska, a history of weak and ambiguous eminent domain laws. 2006, we get to the Deb Fischer, it's called the loophole throughout the campaign, and I think that's aptly named. 2006, the Fischer bill was a reaction to a case called Kelo versus the City of New London, which is the famous controlling Supreme Court case on condemnation and eminent domain. So that's what really started tipping it off. So Deb Fischer, on the one hand, did a good thing. She said, well, this doesn't sound right for Nebraska. We can't just have a taking of all our neighbors' ground and giving it to corporations. That doesn't sound right at all. So she passes or drafts legislation. Well, the lobbyists get in there, and there's a loophole. Who doesn't have to abide by this protection in the 2006 bill of Ms. Fischer? Pipelines. And it's not even defined oil pipelines. There's not a footnote defining it, just pipelines. If you and I want to get together and have a pipeline, whatever, then we can take our fellow Nebraska citizens' land, period. And another interesting thing on this topic of ethanol production, what the Fischer bill also did is not only did it exempt pipelines and say you can take ground from our citizens, but it says if you are putting in transmission lines for alternate energy sources, windmill or sun power, you do not have the power of eminent domain. So not only was it saying oil yes, it's saying alternative energy no. Okay? The playing field is so unlevel in this state, it's an embarrassment. We move forward to 2011, a special session, much in the news, sparked off by this Trans-Canada, how can this happen, foreign company taking our land. That was controversial, it's a special session, a couple $100,000 to get that underway. Out of that comes MOPSA, the Major Oil Pipeline Siting Act. Legislation specifically on now we're going to think about this, we're going to have a vision towards the future, how we are going to route pipelines throughout our state. Are we going to do it in this crisscross fashion? Are we going to think of maybe having corridors, energy corridors that might make sense? What are some of the restrictions? How do we evaluate it? Some pretty decent legislation to protect all of us and our state's interests. Then we fast forward to the regular session. TransCanada's lobbyists get more and more involved. They realize this MOPSA deal is going to delay our getting this pipeline approved. We're going to have to go through a way more stringent review process under MOPSA, which is the Public Service Commission in Nebraska, who regulates common carriers, of which a pipeline is a common carrier, and who to this day has the regulation authority over pipelines. But instead of going through the PSC, who's done this for decades and decades, we're in the special session going to slip in some new legislation found in LB 1161. And LB 1161 changes it from before, where the PSC would determine the route, and the PSC is 5 elected individuals, okay, from 5 districts with 6-year terms. The PSC before, they would trigger eminent domain rights. LB 1161 switches it from the PSC, from 5 elected officials, and gives it to 1, the governor. So whether you're Democrat or Republican, Independent, Green, it doesn't really matter. If the governor who's in power at that time is more friendly to big business or whatever it is, surprise, surprise, we've went from the entity, the PSC, that has done it for decades. Now the governor alone will decide. He will determine the route. And if he says, I like this route, whether he does it like this and rubber stamps it, or whether he actually reads the report that the DEQ gives him, He triggers eminent domain rights. He decides if you get to treat and use your land as you want, or if someone else is going to tell you what you can and can't do. That's the decision our governor now has, thanks to this legislation, which, by the way, we've challenged in court. Captioned there is Randy Thompson and others v. Heinemann challenged the constitutionality of this power shift and delegation of authority. One of the aspects of the LB 1161 is this NDEQ, Nebraska Department of Environmental Quality evaluation. And in that evaluation, they have to have a public meeting, which they just did. Some of you probably saw about that. There was quite a to-do about that. But their charge, the DEQ, was this: analyze environmental, economic, and social impacts. There was no definition. There was no footnotes. There was no further explanation. Just, you guys go out and let's look at these impacts. Okay. Well, I have no doubt the DEQ is doing the best they can, and I'm not going to bash the DEQ. They were foist this project for the first time in the DEQ's history, trying to do their best, and they put together a 600-page report, helped by HDR out of Omaha, who is TransCanada's contractor, not only in Nebraska, but also for a project for ExxonMobil in Alaska. So that's who is behind the data and analysis in the report the DEQ has. So at the public meeting, there's a requirement in LB 1161, you got to have at least one public meeting, and they did that. I was there, along as many others here, on December 4th. And the point of that meeting was to discuss Nebraska impacts for and on Nebraska, about this Nebraska route, held by the Nebraska DEQ, supervised by them, and for Nebraskans to be heard. So now, I don't know if that slide is subtle enough, but there's a little theme in where I'm kind of going of what the point of the meeting was. So, who spoke first? Well, there he is, our friend, Mr. Corey Goulet. And Mr. Goulet, the Vice President of TransCanada, with his Canadian passport, was the first person to speak at our public meeting about our pipeline, their pipeline, and the effects of it in our state. And I took very good notes on what he said. The very first thing, he says it benefits Nebraska. This is that overall theme they've been pushing, the kind of the headline news. If I can get Nebraskans just to bite on any of this and turn their brains off, we might get this done. Benefits Nebraska jobs. Okay, we all want jobs. Yesterday it was announced unemployment is the lowest in 4 years. I think that's good. It's got to keep going. Let's look at Keystone 1, our case study, because they have a pipeline in the eastern part of the state. 50 permanent jobs. 50 permanent jobs for Nebraskans. Now that's nice. That's nice. But when you balance that against the risks that all of you are potentially taking, our water is taking, well, I don't see the cost benefit there. Let's move to taxes. He told us in 2011 they paid $2.3 million in taxes. Now that's a lot of taxes. That's more than probably all of us pay. But on a $7 billion project, to only pay $2.3 million in taxes, that's state taxes, local taxes, any taxes you can think of, they would have given you the full number they had. That just doesn't make a lot of sense. And as we go down through some of those other things he says, decreased dependency on foreign oil. 2011, the U.S. was a net exporter of oil, okay? Don't be fooled by that. And also, Canada is still a foreign country, last I heard. Shortest route from Canada to Steel City, translation, cheapest for us, TransCanada. Shorter the route, lower construction costs. Safest route because it affects the fewest. False. Keystone 1 is a shorter route through the state. Twin it up with Keystone 1, parallel that, you're going to affect less people. Any leaks would be detected. Well, we know that's false. They had 14 leaks in 12 months on Keystone 1. Any spills would be small, only on a local level, not regional. Translation in Canadian, don't worry, only you will be impacted. It won't get so bad that everyone around you, just you and your town. Lastly, if there is a spill, then we'll give the info to the DEQ for cleanup. So after there's a spill, if they detect it, but first he told us there's not going to be spills, but then if there is a spill, then we'll give the magical data of what's actually in this product and what allows us to transport it for cleanup. Now, another person from Oklahoma was flown in for the oil industry at that meeting, or actually it was Dallas, and he said, don't worry, the oil industry is the most heavily regulated. Okay, that must mean it's safe. Well, we've got some recent things that maybe tell us otherwise. Gulf Coast, you might say, well, that wasn't a pipeline. Well, it was pipe that was constructed going vertical. It was a vertical pipeline, and craftsmanship and construction was the problem that led to that leak. Enbridge, back in Michigan where I lived for 10 years, the Kalamazoo River, 2010 in the summer. Currently $750 million for the cleanup, polluting the water supply. This is a Canadian pipeline, tar sands oil. So why NEAT? Well, to address all the problems that I've talked about, number one, also because TransCanada thought that route in green directly through the heart of the Sandhills was intelligent. Luckily, that got moved by enough landowners rising up and some good groups, Farmers Union, Bold Nebraska, Sierra Club, and others, and farmers and ranchers saying, that's crazy talk. What they tell you, we're going to take care of you. We're going to be your neighbor. You've all probably gotten the glossy flyers and ads. They're spending more money on convincing you they're a good neighbor than they're going to pay for taking all of your land across this state. The budget for land acquisition is about $25 million at current offer prices. They've spent beyond that in lobbyists, D.C., and all the states up and down this route. Their actions tell us they lie. They're not truthful. These are protesters, landowners down in Texas. Okay, now, what are you selling? I've got to be brief on this, but you're selling an easement. They're taking an easement from you. You have property rights. If you imagine a bundle of sticks like they teach us in law school, you carry all these sticks. Every stick is an individual right of what you can and can't do or what you can prevent others from doing on your ground. TransCanada is going to take some of those rights away from you, and they propose to pay you one time. This is not a lease. This is not a renegotiation. This isn't in 30, 40 years, hey, you know what? Now I see what's going on here. I need more money. Look what you're doing to me. Look what you're doing to my field. Look what you're doing to my ranch. They will take from you property rights to go on, under, across, or through with their pipeline. Okay? You still own the land, which means you still have the liability. You didn't sell it to someone else. They don't have fee title. You still get to pay property taxes. You own everything around this pipe, which is one of the Enbridge they're repairing now in Michigan. But they have the right to shoot their pipe through your ground and take a 50-foot permanent easement. That's theirs forever to do as they want to within their easement document. So this is what you're giving up, and it's a one-time payment, and obviously they can come on and off your ground and access it whenever they need to. Second most important slide. This is the document, the legal contract, the easement that you will sign with TransCanada or your neighbors or your friends. If it isn't in this document to protect you, you have no protection for the end of time. Why is that? Because TransCanada has or wants or will ask for a perpetual, forever, permanent easement. Why perpetual? Because the Nebraska legislature didn't do anything to say that's not okay. You're dealing with this TransCanada Keystone Pipeline LP. We have no idea who that is, or who the general partners are, who the limited partners are, or where they come from, or if they'll have any assets if a spill ever occurs. They want the right to abandon in place. You may not want that. And if you don't want that, you're only going to get paid now one time. The only thing they cannot do is install high voltage electrical transmission lines. If that's the one thing they're saying we can't do, what else can they do? And how possibly can you be on a level playing field unless you're united with your other landowners and with a team that's analyzing these risks and trying to help you realize what they are? The legislature didn't review this and didn't ask about these impacts, the document that is the taking of your land. The Attorney General didn't step in and say, let me see if I can get something better for Nebraskans. And the DEQ and the governor haven't either. So we need you to get united, and NEAT is the only vehicle available for doing that. Why NEAT? For all the reasons that we talked about, for the same principles of the Farmers Union. We've got to be together on this. The legislature and governors failed. We need a strong voice negotiating against TransCanada and their lawyers for easement terms in that document that will be the single controlling document of whether there's protection from a spill for you or future generations. Because right now, TransCanada pushes the liability on you if there's an accident, okay? It shouldn't be that way. We want to know, and you deserve, how to interpret the terms. If you don't understand them, they're pulling wool over your eyes. There's other effects of it. What about a resale value? You want to sell someday? You've got the pipeline, your neighbor doesn't. Times are good now, but that can change on a dime. Is your land going to be decreased in value because you've got this wonderful pipeline? What about financing? Can you get insurance with that risk under your ground? Also, the holdouts we've experienced have more leverage. They're getting higher offers. It's pretty simple negotiation. They'll pay more when they need it. Right now they want it. No Nebraska permit, no presidential permit. No reason to rush. And they don't want to go to court across Nebraska either if you want to hold out. And I think we're to the last slide. Now this is the most important slide of all. If we don't actually do something, and I mean all of you, spread the word, tell someone about NEAT, that at least there's this group, talk to your senators, elected officials about eminent domain abuse, and it may not be on your doorstep now, but it's going to affect someone you know if it doesn't get slowed down and cleaned up. So please, take action, be the change you want to see in the world. And if this affects you, join up for NEAT. It's tax deductible, nonprofit corporation. We accept donations to do the work we're doing. And again, I appreciate very much the opportunity from John, Graham, Ben, and the Farmers Union to be here with you today. And I'll be around during lunch if there's any questions or anything like that.